And it's a very good afternoon to the Sportsfan Radio panel and a special guest today, noted sports lawyer Paul Horvath. Judge, I think you were instrumental in getting Paul onto the show, so I'm going to turn you loose.
Thanks, Professor. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, John. Thanks for inviting me. No
problems. You're introduced as a sports lawyer. You are a sports lawyer. Many people in Melbourne say they're sports lawyer. Let me say you're a genuine sports lawyer. I know you have a great love and interest in sport and the law. And let's just go straight into it. We've got you on to talk about the Shayna Jack case, Paul. Firstly, who is Shayna Jack? Why is her case important?
So Shayna Jack is an Australian swimmer in the national team. She most recently in 2018 won gold at the Brisbane Commonwealth Games, and with the 4x100, I think it was, freestyle team, she, along with at least Kate Campbell, I think Bronte Campbell as well, broke the world record there. So she's an absolute gun swimmer, and she's based in Queensland. She's been on the national team for sort of 2 or 3 years, and then in about 2019, she was over in Seoul, competing in the World Swimming Championships. She got a tap on the shoulder a day or so before her race and was told she had to come home because she tested positive to a substance called ligandrol.
Just on that, Paul, what is ligandrol? Is it a performance-enhancing drug? Because as I understand it, it was determined to be pharmacologically irrelevant. So tell us what this substance is and how potent is it?
Yeah, so 2 aspects to that, John. The first one is that ligandrol as a substance itself, I would best describe as basically a designer steroid. So you can take it in a liquid form, you can take it in a powder form. So it's fairly, rather than steroids which need to be injected and things of that nature, but taken in sufficient quantities, it can grow muscle, aid recovery and so on. So it is in the same category as steroids. In terms of the quantity that was found on her, the expert called by Sport Integrity Australia in that case said that the amount in her system was pharmacologically irrelevant. So it was an extremely small amount. And just for your listeners to get some idea, my assessment is that they use something in the nature of nanograms, which is 13 decimal places. So you might have 10, 30, 50 nanograms of the substance, which is 13 decimal places, which is ridiculously small amounts. And my view is that you need sort of minimum amounts before people should be prosecuted for these types of substances.
And as I understand, Paul, she always maintained, and I don't think the evidence has ever been found against this, that any ingestion by her was not intentional.
That's true. What the authorities say in these and many other cases is most athletes are going to say that, even those who are trying to get around the system are going to say that. So, however, that carried a bit more weight in her case. But one thing about it is that the authorities, and certainly in this case, it was put to her, well, it's a small amount, but that could be because we caught you out microdosing. In other words, this is the one occasion where you used a little bit too much. It didn't clear out of your system before we detected it, and therefore you've probably been using it over a longer period of time, but we just haven't caught you on those other occasions. Now, she used evidence against that, and I say she put forward evidence rather than speculation, which there's a lot of in these cases, particularly from the authorities, where they say what they use against you is an absence of something. So in other words, you can't prove how it got into your system. And an athlete like Ms. Jack says, I don't know where I came across it. It could have been in the gym. It could have been a supplement that a family member was using in the household. She got many supplements tested, at great expense in laboratories. None of those showed that they had the Ligandrol in it, etc. So she can say, I've gone to the trouble to get these tests, but the authorities say, well, you can't prove how it got into your system, which is problematic from my point of view in the first place.
Paul, she got the 4-year suspension, which is the standard suspension. What happened thereafter? And I think this is where you got involved.
Yeah, so the standard that you get when you get a notice, an infraction notice, from Sport Integrity Australia or Swimming Australia, is that it says you're going to get 4 years unless you want to take this case to a tribunal. So she then files an application to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And just a footnote is that Swimming Australia requires any disputed cases to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, as opposed to an internal anti-doping tribunal that a number of other sports might have. And that's a bit of a problem for me, because it necessarily means that the athlete has to invest a 5+ figure sum just for the filing fees to have their case heard, to cover the arbitration costs for a single arbitrator, not a panel, for a single arbitrator. Now, mind you, there's 3 parties in the hearing: the athlete, Sport Integrity Australia, and the sport itself, so Swimming Australia. Those other 2 parties get to pay a quarter of the fees each, and the athlete pays half. Completely improper and unfair, in my view.
And this is at this stage, she was a 19-year-old, obviously amateur swimmer.
Yep.
I'm not sure if she's got another job, but okay, there's a financial issue there.
A big financial burden, yes.
What happened at CAS?
So she had a full hearing in front of Alan Sullivan QC, a well-regarded Sydney barrister who's done a lot in sport. And one of the key findings that he came to was that her evidence was very compelling. And indeed, he said one of the most impressive witnesses in his 40-year career as a barrister. That was important.
Just stop you there, Paul. That's an extraordinary
That's
encouragement or pat in the back for Shayna Jack. This is an independent sports QC who says she's one of the most impressive witnesses in 40 years.
Yep.
Gee, that's a strong support for her.
Right. And I sat through her record of interview with SIA when the case first occurred, which went for about 4.5 hours. She was steadfast. She was exhaustive in terms of her answers. The questions were exhausting. 4.5 hours is a massive interview for anyone who knows these types of cases. So no stone was left unturned in terms of her being asked questions or answering questions. And my suggestion is that Mr. Sullivan would have certainly listened to that interview, and no doubt her evidence in the court would have been consistent with that lengthy interview, in which if someone was telling untruths, they would be caught out by giving inconsistent evidence at the later time at a hearing.
Okay.
He wouldn't have been up for any dodgy stake defence, I can assure you. He'd see right through that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what was the outcome of that, Paul?
So he found that she had met the threshold test, and there's a few cases that say even though you can't prove the exact product that caused you to test positive, in other words, here's a bowl of supplement powder that my brother was using in the house. It got into the blender that I was using, and that's what caused me to test positive. She couldn't do that. And so there's a couple of cases that say, in the absence of that sort of evidence, if you give compelling evidence to show that you didn't intentionally cheat, then we can give a reduction down to the 2 years. And that's a fairly sort of narrow defence that requires fairly strong evidence. Now, she got her hair tested through the world expert on hair testing, Professor Kintz, out of France. That evidence was rejected, albeit that her hair test showed that she hadn't taken any SARMs or any Ligandrol for reasons of a technical dispute. Nonetheless, about 8 to 10 urine tests were produced over an 18-month period leading up to this offence, which were all negative for use of Ligandrol. And so you might think that's pretty strong evidence to show over a sustained period of time leading into this positive test she hadn't been using. And I think the court took fairly heavy weight in relation to that evidence.
Well, notwithstanding that, then, as I understand, Sport Integrity Australia decided to appeal the decision.
Can I just add one other important piece of evidence? You're allowed to call character evidence that you're not a person who's needs to or is inclined to cheat or that sort of thing. So Ms. Jack called strong evidence, including from Kate Campbell, who is an Order of Australia medalist, she was the flag bearer at the recent Olympics, a very highly regarded person. So a number of people put their necks on the line to say, we vouch for her character and the truth of what she says.
Okay, just stopping you there. She's a 19-year-old girl, now 21. She spent a lot of money to get the appeal up. She's got one of the world experts on hair testing. She's got the support of highly regarded individuals. Got to say, Paul, not many young swimmers or young athletes or young people could get together this kind of firepower in their defence. Notwithstanding that, SIA decided to appeal the decision.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of an unusual coming together of certain facts. One strange part of it is the fact that on the 1st of January this year, the law changed under the WADA code, which said that the requirement that you need to show that you didn't intentionally cheat, the word cheat was taken out of the footnotes to the section that Ms. Jack was charged under. In other words, it doesn't help you any longer to show that you didn't intentionally take the substance. So a lot of what's decided in her case, in my view, is largely irrelevant because the rules have changed and you can't apply it to future cases. So I don't know why that was pursued. I'm told that it was pursued because there hadn't been any other case in which this narrow avenue of appeal for athletes to get from 4 years down to 2 years and to challenge intention, no good case had been available for that to be tested before the Court of Arbitration for Sport in the past. Hers was a good vehicle for that argument. And I'm also told that, or I understand that the weight given to her oral evidence was deemed too much by the authorities, and they sought to challenge that as well, to say, look, you've given too much weight to the athlete's evidence in circumstances where the authorities, it seems to me, tend to say you've got to be very careful about what weight you give to any athlete's evidence in a doping case because, of course, they're going to say they're innocent and they didn't do anything wrong.
In any event, the Court of Arbitration for Sport did not uphold the appeal, and it was reduced back to the 2 years. Is that the situation?
Correct. So in other words, she maintained her 2 years. She was back swimming in about May this year, which unfortunately meant she missed the Olympics.
Yep.
And she continues to swim. The full decision hasn't been handed down yet. I checked on Friday morning, so we don't know the reasons.
In Switzerland too, isn't it, Paul? That's the full. I think Rich McLaren was one of the arbitrators.
Correct.
So strong bench.
Correct. Michael Beloff, who's well-regarded, Jan Paulson, all very well-regarded arbitrators.
He's English guru on sports law and has written the major text. Okay, so she's back to being able to swim. She's still only 21. Where does this leave Sports Integrity Australia, in your opinion, Paul?
Oh, look, I guess they'd say, look, we need to test the law and test the cases on an as-needs basis. My concern is the system, it shows some cracks in the system, in my view, to the general public because she's been on Australian Story. People can make up their own mind as to whether they think she's pulled the wool over everyone's eyes or whether she is genuine when she says, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know how this occurred. Yet I've got to stick out of the sport for 2 years. And it's interesting that in itself, that wasn't deemed long enough for the authorities, and they felt that they need to push for the 4 years nonetheless. The concern, as she says, is that we're in a system, for some of your listeners that don't know, where you are presumed guilty. So you test positive, you are presumed guilty. You must, in circumstances of this type of substance, you must get 4 years unless you can prove with strong evidence that you didn't intend to commit the offence, or that there was some sort of contamination of a supplement that you took, or some other valid explanation on strong evidence, as I say. It's also noteworthy that you need to gather scientific evidence yourself in getting your supplements tested, and the evidence that's usually accepted by way of scientific evidence requires a WADA accredited laboratory, of which there's one in Australia. And guess what? The government uses it, so athletes can't. So if you want WADA accredited laboratories, you've got to go overseas. And so I've had to use, in a recent case, a German laboratory. I've been trying Canada, the US. You've got to go to these overseas countries to get people whose evidence is then accepted in the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So it's very expensive, complex, convoluted and difficult for athletes in circumstances where you're presumed guilty. So you do nothing, you get your 4 years. And might I say, criminals are treated better in that criminals get a presumption of innocence. You are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Athletes in the doping sphere are presumed guilty and must prove through their own expense that they're not guilty.
Paul, can I suggest that the alacrity with which Sport Integrity Australia has pursued Shayna Jack puts paid to any suggestion which came out when Bridget McKenzie and other sports ministers have said, the government wants to work with athletes and wants to work with sport. It seems to me that they've set themselves up fair and square as the cop and the beat. And this concept of being an organisation that's trying to keep sport together flies in the face of that.
Look, what gets trotted out often is we're trying to create a level playing field, for all of the athletes, and that is just not my experience. A lot of these athletes say, I'm wanting to operate in a level playing field like a Shayna Jack. Where's the level playing field for her in terms of being able to swim, in terms of being able to defend herself, and in terms of how she is assessed as a matter of her integrity? And obviously a lot of people question the integrity of people who are found guilty of these sorts of offences. And the level playing field seems to go away, in my opinion, and there seems to be a disproportionate prosecution of athletes in the nature of a Shayna Jack, as opposed to someone like a Lance Armstrong and these types of high-level convicted drug users, sports drug users, are just so light years away from the sort of case that Shayna Jack was involved in.
Paul, I'll just leave it at that. I know you want to talk, and we want to hear from you about vaccinations in sport. We might leave that to another day because it really is a topic in itself. And I know that you have provided some very strong advice on this. We'll just leave it up to the panel. Is there anything else that the panel want to ask Paul about this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Judge. I had two things to ask Paul. Interesting that she gets a 2-year suspension eventually, but it's now been 2 years and 3 months since she tested positive. So isn't there something wrong with the system that takes that long to get to some decision that affects this poor girl? And not only that, you were talking about all the testing experts cost. Surely something needs to be done both about time and cost with respect to these things so that it becomes fair for everybody.
Yeah, it's hard to give a parallel. I do have a comparative example I use elsewhere, but I don't want to use it here because it's a bit too emotive. But the problem with these cases is that we can talk about these things, but you just get no traction from the authorities. The public might look at, say, the Essendon supplements case, and in theory, ultimately Essendon were found guilty. They got a penalty. And so that's a justification, in a sense, for how hard the prosecutions went. In saying that, it's not really a comparable case to this one because that was a team group and there were millions of dollars available through the club to defend those athletes there. So it's sort of hard to say to people, can you see the injustices in this case and it should be changed? Because obviously there's only a few athletes who fall into this position. But my personal problem is, as a sports lover, I love watching our athletes, etc., perform at the Olympics and on the world stage, and I get a lot out of it, and I think the community does as well. And so we've got a responsibility to assist them when they get into this sort of strife, because we take, obviously, the benefits of their performance, and so we should also be providing assistance. And, for example, some sort of a legal aid scheme, government-funded legal aid scheme, which is available in all other spheres, which would cover at least some of the legal costs and some of the scientific costs. And until we do that sort of thing, it's unfair in a system where you're presumed guilty.
I was going to say something I enjoyed at the Olympics. Her coach, Dean Boxall, he's the one who almost ripped his own head off and threw it into the pool. He'll get her up and about if anyone will.
Yeah, he's pretty colourful and energetic character, and I know there's a pretty strong relationship there. But I'm not sure if that answers your question, Professor.
Well, Professor, can I just suggest that Paul's raised a bloody good issue, legal aid for sports people. I haven't heard that argued before. I think it's a great idea. And when you relate it back to Shayna Jack and just relate it back to any other 19-year-old young athlete that you know, it's almost impossible to be able to pursue these cases without assistance with people like yourself, Paul, and whoever else she's got in her corner. It just about makes it impossible to pursue your legal rights. So I love your idea.
Yeah, but I've had a response. I put that to a government inquiry about 10 or 11 years ago, and the response I got, that's just snouts in the trough for the lawyers. In other words, the lawyers getting rich. That's the first answer that I got. And then, it's just unfortunate. And the other response you tend to get is, let's get lawyers to provide their services pro bono in these types of sports cases. For free, which I just think is absurd in this day and age of professional and high level and elite sport.
Spoken like true dictators. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, look, thanks, Paul, for that. I think we might take the judge up on his idea that we'll get you back to talk about Ty Webster and mandatory vaccination. I think in the current climate, that's a very, very important topic of an area of discussion too for athletes who, for whatever reason, might get caught by what some might call discriminatory action. But yeah, we might save that for another day. But feel free to stick around because, as I understand it, you're a little bit of a rugby league fan, and we're now going to go to Paul Dalligan, who's going to tell us about why the Rabbitohs beat Manly, much to Schooner and Middy's consternation. Paul, over to you.
Well, I massively enjoyed the Rabbitohs win there. 40 years support I've put in the red and green, and this has been my second trip to the big dance in my years of supporting them. I walked around like a death row inmate for that entire match. So people asked, how did I celebrate? I said I sat down at the end of the match. That's how stressful it was. But we managed to win, and it's also on my grand final birthday it'll be for me. So let's hope. I was going to go to Brisbane, Professor, for the match, but it's very hard to sneak across two borders at 6'4" to get there for the game next weekend. So I think I'll be watching it right where I stand. But if Paul is still there, he wouldn't have enjoyed too much that Storm match. More drops than an egg and spoon race. I tell you what, I think the Storm made more mistakes in one game than they've done all year, and they saved it for the worst possible time. If they were Pavarotti, they dropped the microphone. So it just, I can't believe it. Craig Bellamy, we're very lucky there wasn't some furniture damaged in that coach's box with him, or a wall punched Alistair Clarkson style. I think he was more stunned than he was angry, Craig Bellamy, just at how inept the Storm were. And it was quite disappointing, but you have to give credit where it's due. I have tipped the last 5 winners, you'll confirm, Professor, and I did tip the Panthers a few months ago, but that was before Nathan Cleary went down with his injury. He's back, but it was more about a defensive effort from the Panthers. There was an amazing try from the Panthers where he put a pinpoint kick across the field onto the chest of his winger. Now, that's as impressive as any kick seen in yesterday's AFL Grand Final. Cleary is the big reason the Panthers are starting favourites. He's been cleared of the tackle that was put on report. So I'm actually, this will surprise you, grateful that Cleary will be there, because if he wasn't there and South did win, there'd be the big asterisks on the performance. So I think the Storm, I did check the markets earlier, they're still favourites to win next year's premiership, despite the fact they're losing 3 stars in Addo Carr, who didn't do much yesterday. Nico Hines has been a revelation. And Dale Finucane is the one that Craig Bellamy didn't want to lose. So there's still enough there for the Storm to be favourites next year. Most important with the Storm is their system. And it didn't work yesterday, but generally the Storm finish top most years or thereabouts. They're a real shining light as to the fact that consistency and hard work does pay off. But this time the NRL would be doing cartwheels that it's an all-Sydney grand final, and for once it doesn't involve the Roosters. So I can tell you what, Sydney is needing a reason to celebrate much is Melbourne, the city itself. So it'll be a great week lead up to an all-Sydney grand final, and there'll be a lot of heat because we've got the 2 coaches going back at it, Wayne Bennett and Ivan Cleary. Ivan Cleary, quite wisely, has already said, and I really think this is strategic, Wayne Bennett's the best coach in my lifetime, and I'll stay out of it like I do best. So I don't think you'll see a war of words between the coaches. The players will just have to settle in and focus on what they've got. I'm very interested, the bookies have opened the Panthers significant favourites. That was a war yesterday, an absolute battle. The reason the Storm lost is they lost their 2 best forwards early on, and Christian Welsh and Brandon Smith. Without that go forwards, the Storm just didn't have the ability to lay the platform for their superstars. As simple as that. You can't do much if you're not winning the forwards battle, and the 2 best forwards were off with the HIA test. So it's a shame for Storm fans, but rugby league fans Australia-wide will be looking forward to the big match next weekend.
Paul, just on the Rabbitohs-Manly game, 2 questions. First of all, one from Schooner via text. Manly, what happened? Why weren't they successful?
I think the class of the Rabbitohs prevailed. The Manly, I think, have been overly reliant on possibly the best individual performer I've ever seen in 40 years, Tom Trbojevic. Their halves just didn't stand up, but the Rabbitohs had stars all over the park. It was just a massive team effort. Wayne Bennett's coaching. Got to remember again that Latrell Mitchell, our best players, out, and yet we still managed to withhold the Panthers. So I think the Panthers, the Manly, just all respect to Schooner and to Manly, I think they were possibly overachieving, and they might have played their grand final a little bit earlier than when they fronted up against the Rabbitohs. So I think the Rabbitohs, as I expected and hoped they'd do, just had a bit too much class all over the park for Manly. So I think Schooner should be proud of a good season for Manly. A lot of people had them tipped to finish well outside the 8.
Including you.
Including me, and I'll own that. They are, if we look at next year's odds, $7 to win, the Rabbitohs 8. So that may be largely due to the fact we're losing our general, Adam Reynolds. This could be the last game for several people. Last game in football for Wayne Bennett, possibly, but I will tell you this, the NRL has announced the second Brisbane team, or about to, and it will most likely be Redcliffe. I didn't think they had a good relationship with Wayne Bennett, but I think they've seen come to their senses. Blind Freddie's had a knock on the door up there at Redcliffe HQ and said Wayne Bennett's a pretty good coach. He wants a job. What do you think? So Blind Freddie might have won out. they were going to go with Paul Green, but you will hear very soon that Redcliffe will be announced as the next NRL team, and you'll probably hear, as sure as night follows day, that Wayne Bennett at age 89 or whatever he is will be the Redcliffe Dolphins coach. So there's a first for you on air.
While you're on Wayne Bennett, Paul, did you see his press conference after the match?
Yeah, I liked it. He's always entertaining. He like Cleary, you'd have described as a bit sort of bristly, and Wayne, though, he gives enough away to make it entertaining.
He was asked by one of the reporters about his departure from the Broncos. And when he was first asked it, he said, "Oh, no, look, I don't want to talk about that." And they went on and asked another couple of questions. And then they came back to him, not asking him about Brisbane, but he just decided, "Oh, yeah, I want to say something about that. I was undermined."
Yep, and they tried to knife him, but there are enough people at the Rabbitohs that he's worked with to give him, or he talked character references before, to overcome that. So maybe it's because Brisbane didn't want him coaching against them. I'm not sure, but maybe they knew how good he was. So like a lawyer leaving a law firm where they don't want you to be a competitor.
That couldn't happen, Paul.
What's that?
That couldn't happen.
No, I've never heard of that happening. It might have been they didn't want him up against them, so setting up somewhere else successfully. He certainly didn't miss them on the spray, and there's no love lost there between Wayne and Brisbane.
I did like his response though, because the report he said what he wanted to say about being undermined, and then the reporter wanted to come back to it and said, "Okay, listen, Wayne, when you said undermined, what did you mean?" One of the best responses I've heard in press conferences. He looked straight at the reporter and said, "Look it up in the dictionary, son. That's what I meant."
Yeah, that's it. Reminds me of those flying high movies. So he's gone to hospital. Well, what a hospital? What is it? Oh, it's a building with patients and doctors. Yeah, very nicely done. It was from that playbook from Wayne. He's got more tricks than a Vegas magician. So he'll have the Rabbitohs primed and ready for next weekend. I'm genuinely happy just to be there. I can say that with all sincerity. We were kicked out of the competition. We were put back in. I was in court the day we were readmitted to the comp. I'm happy just to see another grand final, and I'll stand by that if Penrith wins. Penrith is an amazing story for rugby league. It's something, without any disrespect to AFL, very few AFL teams have a primary basis of local juniors in their team, whereas you can say with Penrith is not only do they have mostly local juniors, they're from disadvantaged areas. This team gives entire areas and millions of people hope, and it's something to be proud of, and I will certainly won't begrudge the Panthers if they can win this big one.
Special guest Paul, have you got any questions for our guru?
Oh, look, I was interested in the Latrell Mitchell absence because obviously he's a very good player and that can cause difficulties. In saying that, I've seen in a number of sports the absence of one or two stars. You can still perform at the very best if it's about the team rather than that individual star. But I think it'll be a big assignment up against the Panthers, don't you think?
It will be. I was going to say as well with the local code, I know some Geelong people, when Gary Ablett left, it actually made them a better team because they were so Gary Ablett focused that it allowed the Geelong Cats to grow into a better team with 6 or 7 All-Australians due to him not being there. So with the Rabbitohs, we've got a young kid there, Blake Taff, who's been very impressive. He's part of the reason we didn't have the money to keep Adam Reynolds, which devastated me at the time and surprised me, being our general. But we've managed to overcome that, and just have a look at the Storm without Pappenhausen there. You saw Nico Hines have just a breakout season, probably tripled his salary going to the Sharks. It's a shame that he's not in the Storm system anymore, but it often allows those lesser-known players to step up and show what they're capable of. So Wayne Bennett, the master, has made the decision. We've got Benji Marshall, who no one else wanted. We've got to remember that. Benji Marshall was going for something cheaper than the first Aldi catalogue. So he was available to anyone who wanted him, and he's been a revelation as an impact player. So I think he could turn the game when he comes on late. Watch for that to happen.
The other big news in the week for Storm and Maroon supporters was Billy Slater being appointed as the Maroons coach. what do you think of the appointment? And I guess just from sometimes we see that ex-gun players appointed to coaching roles potentially too early on after finishing their playing careers may not have the skills and the experience under good coaches to step up to that role. What do you think about Billy's ability to fill that important position?
Well, it's funny. I'll stick with the former analogy. I used to watch a lot of Geelong Cats games, and Matthew Scarlett at the back was almost like an orchestra conductor, the way that he'd set up the plays in front of him. And Billy Slater was at the back of one of the best teams ever seen, very instrumental in setting them up on field, on directives from the coaching box. We had Gordon Tallis on the show once, and I said to him with Mal Meninga in Queensland, it'd be like hosting a backyard barbecue and having the Rolling Stones rock up. You don't have to do a lot. Just set up there, boys. Yeah, just brown sugar and satisfaction. But there is a bit more involved. They'll want to play for Billy Slater, but he won't have to be too much involved tactically. You don't have to tell, Cameron Munster how to throw a cutout pass. You don't have to tell Kalen Ponga how to run the ball, but they will want to play for him. You'll find that he'll have some smart people in his ear tactically, and he'll be, I won't say he'll be more a figurehead, but tactically wise, it's very different to the 26 rounds of club football coaching, which he wouldn't be ready for. And that's what brings down a lot of the AFL players. They go straight from playing into coaching. State of Origin's a different beast, and I think he'll be fantastic, and he'll unite that team who want to play for him, which is the most important thing in State of Origin.
To both Pauls, maybe just a quick question. Could Cameron Smith have been a very good coach for Queensland just for the 3 series and just uniting players?
It's interesting you say that. Craig Bellamy said that Cameron Smith's the best coach at the Storm, including himself. He said because Cameron's actually out there doing it. He's in the trenches. So that is interesting. Maybe Cameron wasn't ready for it, but you might find that he's an advisor, as will be Jonathan Thurston, to Slater. But it mustn't have been something that Cameron Smith wanted, because I think he would have been the first choice over and above Slater if the two were available. But Slater's long been touted as an incredibly smart guy, very active on the field, physically and mentally, and revving the troops up. So I'll be very interested in next year's State of Origin, as I am every year.
And maybe one for the judge. Billy Slater was appointed as a coach, a mentor down at St Kilda. Is he still in that role, Judge, or is he?
That lasted about 6 months, I think, Gelding.
Right.
It was never clear to me what that role was. I assumed that it was a tackling type role, but apparently it was a high performance role. And like many of the big announcements at St Kilda, it didn't last all that long, unfortunately, because I think he's a fantastic fellow, great character, and I was very excited when he went down to the Saints. But I don't know what the fallout was, but it hardly got going before it was finished.
Former track work jockey too, Gelding, one for you.
Yes, for Gay Waterhouse many years ago. In fact, also has a breeding interest now, Billy Slater. So has a breeding company. He's trying to get into the
track work jockey, but I didn't.
Trying to get in the syndication business of owning horses by getting other people to pay for them.
Well, the best revelation of the week, Jonathan Thurston, for 10 years has lived on $300 a week, if you don't mind. His first manager set him up on a budget, and he's got all this property portfolio, but don't go out for drinks or dinner with him because you'll be paying for it. He's got $300 to last for the whole week. So there you go. So some rugby league players do have a scone and they use it. So.
I wouldn't have thought just Jonathan Thurston would have to buy a drink, would he? You'd be the first one there to buy them one.
No, he's calmed it all down a bit since he was pretty wild. He got cut from the Bulldogs, which, Professor, I'm sure you're still in therapy over. But, so he's got his life on track. He's a genuine character. He's a great asset of rugby league, as is Billy Slater. And it is just fantastic to see Slater and Fittler, two of the best players I've ever seen, going at it next year in the coaching ranks.
Now, Giraffe, some of your nights out with Gordon tell us. Did Gordon have to put his hand in his pocket?
Well, I had him at the RACV club once, and I said, no, it's my club, I'm getting the beers. And gave me a look that would have turned SHIT white and said, "It's my shout." And I'm a tall guy, but he's a big guy. I'll let him buy the next round, I can tell you.
All right, Paul. Well, we look forward to next Sunday when you can give us your erudite opinion about who's going to win and why, but we will say that till next Sunday.
I might be so nervous I can't speak. That'll be a first. I might have to just sign it in or type it in, so no, I'll be right.
All right. Okay, general point of discussion for today, and I broached this with the judge during the week. The two presidents from last night's grand finalists in the AFL, Kate Rioffi and Kylie Watson-Wheeler, both women. Peggy O'Neill, the president of Richmond. So that means that a woman president has presided over the team that has won the AFL premiership 4 out of the last 5 years. And my question to the panel is that coincidence?
Professor, can I just start it off? I think this is one of the most significant events in recent AFL history, because at the moment it's still considered a bit of an oddity or novelty or whatever, and over time it won't be. And I think it's going to change, and it has clearly changed, the culture of boards. I think in previous times, the presidency was something which was very much sought of by men with big egos as a sort of another trinket to add to their collection of the presidency of their football club. And they ran it as such. I'll just give you the recently departed John Elliott, Jeff Kennett, Richard Pratt, Lindsay Fox, captains of industry. And I'm sure that they ran their boards, their football boards, like they ran their corporate boards, pretty much as a solo effort, whereas the essence of women is being collaborative. Teamwork is a natural thing for women. And I think when you've got an absence of an ego, you've got a good start, because they're not doing it for themselves, they're doing it for the club. And so I actually think, I don't know what the other guys think, but I think this is a major issue and turning point for Australian rules football.
Professor, I was thinking about it when you raised the question about the success of it all, and I think the judges hit it right on the head. A lot of presidents of football clubs seem to have been businessmen that wanted to get their names in the back pages of the paper, and kind of just beyond, no one bigger than Elliott. You had Bond at Richmond, Kennett at Hawthorn. Can't help but say something. I think John's hit it right on the head. I think it's ego for big businessmen that want to be out there and be up there in the limelight. And these women, all three of them, you notice they're never hardly ever mentioned in the paper. And I heard the Melbourne president talk last night on Fox Football, and she talked for about 2 minutes and said it's all down to the players. So rather than say I've done this and I've done that, it was again just passing it back. And I think John's just hit it right on the nail, right on the head.
I've got an expression: charismatic people will take you to heaven, then take you to hell. And if you look at the people like Elliott, Kennett, Pratt, and Lindsay Fox, they start wonderfully, but how do they end? And almost invariably, not well. And I think that's charisma, huge ego. It falls into the same category, and I just don't think these women have got it. Paul, I know that you're a great supporter and possibly even lawyer for Richmond. You'd have a view about Peggy O'Neill, I suspect.
Yeah, look, Peggy's very well regarded. I think she's very collaborative, obviously a smart operator, and just very passionate about giving time to the club. In her sort of camp would be our friend Diana Taylor, who you worked closely with, John, at the Western Region Football League. I think she's in a senior role at the CAS still now.
Yes, wouldn't be surprised if she were to become a president in due course, a partner of Freehills Lawyers. And again, that kind of personnel, exactly the sort of person I'm talking about, Paul.
Yeah. So, hardworking and with the best interest of the club at mind. And, just another example to your little list of gentlemen, Diamond Joe Goodnick, speaking of the Demons, people might remember him and his involvement at the D's.
Take you to hell.
The other one I wanted to mention was, it's a funny mix sometimes where you get people from captains of industry and so on. And then we saw what happened at Essendon at a time where very smart people on the board, but that sort of governance structure that's required in football clubs wasn't quite happening. So that obviously favourite son and others in the football department were doing things that were a little bit questionable, but the board just wasn't aware of those things. So it's that governance thing that needs to be happening properly, whether you're male, female or otherwise. Those are my thoughts.
Paul, Paul Dalligan, is it a feature of rugby league to have female?
No, well, I saw just looking at an article from 6 years ago. There was a West Tigers chairman. Her name was Marina Go, which is appropriate because she has gone, unfortunately. She was pushing for more representation of women. I completely agree with what you're saying about the collaborative nature, John and Judge, in the absence of alpha male behaviour, which I hate both in a sporting context and in a law firm capacity. Unfortunately, no, I'm not aware of female chairmen or chairwomen, Freudian slip, in rugby league. So despite, there was even talk in this article from 6 years ago about clubs being penalised in terms of games, points, if they didn't appoint women to the board. So that, as far as I'm aware, never became part of the game's ethos because it never happened. Unfortunately, there has to be more equality in the game.
Sorry, Paul. I was just going to say, I think it was the Bulldogs had a CEO from rugby for a period of time.
Castle, yeah, Ray
Castle.
Yep.
I don't know if she's still there.
As well.
Yeah, sorry?
Her castle toppled, I think, as
it
well.
It did. She moved across to rugby union from memory, but yes, women in those senior positions in rugby league, I'm not sure.
Paul, the last special guest we had 2 weeks ago, Lynne Anderson, she was chairwoman at the Bulldogs.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I think she stood down either at the end of last year or at the start of this year. But so I think once she stood down, that was the end of women being at the helm of any rugby league club.
And Paul,
it is unfortunate that there's just not more involvement, because I completely agree that we need the change, the diversity.
And Paul Dalligan, a bit of trivia: chairman is not sexist. The man actually refers to the French man, M-A-I-N, which is French for hand. It's the hand that controls the chair. So it's actually a non-sexist word to be applied to both men and women chairmen. There you go, bit of trivia.
Well, I'm the first man in a Smith Crest jumper that's been told to, I think. So, yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, as I've said, gentlemen, Sportsfan Radio is the thinking person's sports show. And I think you've proved that there, Judge. One thing for the panel, with all the controversy that's going on at Collingwood at the moment, not once has anybody mentioned that a woman should stand as the chair. What we've got are two men fighting it out and not doing a very good job of it either. Surely calmer heads should prevail, but calmer heads don't seem to be around most sporting clubs, unfortunately.
Professor, just on that, Collingwood tried to get some women on the board, and I think they had to leave the board because they really didn't meet the qualifications that are set out in their constitution of being members for a certain period of time. Again, presidents think that they can just bring in whoever they want onto these boards, but they've got to remember that clubs have a lot of constitution and rules, and our guest Paul rightly pointed out that some of these businessmen that run are used to running their boards as they wish, rather than worry about constitutions of clubs. So I know Collingwood fell into that Patrick and had to lose a couple of their directors.
It's no surprise to me, Mark. As I've said previously, the world's run by idiots, and so is sport. Collingwood just run by, has been a personal fiefdom of successive presidents over the years, and the members, of course, we're talking about Collingwood members, so, you know, you've sort of got to talk slower and use smaller words when you talk to Collingwood supporters, but they're happy to go along with that, to have a big figurehead, and it's never crossed their minds that, in fact, a woman could be the best thing that Collingwood could have, and in fact, I'd suggest needs at the moment.
The only thing I'd add to all that is Collingwood had Sally Capp on its board for a while, and look where she is now as a fantastic Lord Mayor for Melbourne. Yep. And the other downhill aerial skier, the gold medalist, whose name, Alyssa Camplin, was on their board as well for a period of time. And I'd just suggest that the women that have ascended to presidency have probably done their time on the board, which I think is a very good thing. So perhaps bringing someone straight in as a president, I'm not sure how that would work at Collingwood, but it may for the right person.
I'll tell you one woman who made an impact, that woman running Racing Victoria, who called Peter V'landys a silly little man. I tell you, she didn't miss. That's very brave to call him anything. Nothing gets in his way.
Well, Mr. Dalligan, we know that Peter is your pin-up boy, so no one shall speak ill of V'landys.
He's done an amazing job, and I like Max Gorm's speech as well. The fact that we had these competitions running. Did you see Tina Arena came off the top rope saying, "Why can we have sport and not pantomimes and theatre and stuff?" So that was a bit of a dig at sports, perhaps, but that's for another show.
All right, Paul. Now, Gelding, for those of us who thought that Melbourne would win between 1 and 39 points yesterday and put the superannuation on it, give us some red hot tips for today's Mornington meeting so that we can make some of that money back.
Well, it's been a pretty big week for the racing part of the show, Professor, and it's done fairly well. So we liked a few at Mornington today, but 2 of the 3 picks were scratched. One of them's racing at Benalla, so we might make that one of the specials. So maybe at Mornington today, we'll just go race 7, number 2, Snapper. After seeing the Giraffes dinner last night of oysters and prawns, maybe you can front up with some Snapper tonight after that gets up in race 7. We'll then go to Benalla, where it's Benalla Cup Day, Professor. Race 3, number 12, Shellagag, Robert Hickmott, Jack Hill in the maiden. We then will go to the Benalla Cup, and we like Mike Moroney's horse, race 8, number 9, Embassy, Daniel Stackhouse to ride, and the one that was scratched from Mornington to race at Benalla, race 9, number 17, Camborne, Mick Price, Mick Kent trained, Zach Zane to ride, so we might take that, Professor. The closest I could get to Melbourne is Camborne, so let's see how we go with those 4 tips for today, Professor.
All right, thanks very much, Gelding, and also thanks to our special guest, Paul Horvath. Much appreciated for being on the show, Paul, and as I said, we'll get you back to talk about the Ty Webster matter in a couple of weeks' time, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. Really enjoyed the show.
All right, and until next Sunday, everybody, it's a very good afternoon.
Go D's.